welcome to the JazzSmart podcast. I'm James Rawlinson, and today I'm sat opposite, virtually, with a friend of mine for a few years now, Andy Scott, saxophonist Andy Scott, performer, composer, educator, entrepreneur, and the list goes on. So I'm going to have a little chat with Andy today about a few things. And the first thing I was going to ask Andy is about how he got into music in the first place.
Well, hi James. Great to see you here. Hopefully see you in real life in just over a week in Manchester. Yeah, I got into music. I mean, I'm from the same neck of the woods as you. So I was born in the Bournemouth Pool area and from a family of musicians. It's like my granddad used to play piano, improvise, playing piano with the old silent movies at the cinema or theatre and things like that. And the grandparents were both pianists. They lived just outside London, and visiting opera singers from Europe, they always used to stay at their house. They had this big old house with two grand pianos, and they were their sort of rehearsal pianists. There's been, and the same with my dad. He was clarinetist, went to the Royal College of Music in London, so there was always music around. Tried playing a couple of different instruments. I played the cello, actually, I think when I was about 8 or 9 years old for a few years.
Right.
That was brilliant. But then when my teacher moved out from the area, I think I was so upset that I gave that up, and I ended up switching probably about age 12 to the saxophone. That was a good move at the time, simply because there seemed to be lots and lots of youth big bands in the area at that time. There were loads of them. So my poor mum, she was driving me around most evenings as a teenager to just rehearse virtually every night, and then play in a semi-pro big band at this hotel in Bournemouth. And we used to get on a coach and go up to Watford Coliseum for big band things. And I was, the youngest in the band. So I was kind of brought up with all of that. And following on from that, moved up to Manchester, applied for music college, and went up to Manchester and studied at the Royal Northern College of Music. I took a year out, actually. I didn't get in first year round. So I took a year out, went to Poole College. They had a specialist music course, which was fantastic. And that year did me the world of good, re-auditioned, and fortunately was offered a place. And then the next stage, I suppose, up in Manchester.
Right. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just thinking back to when we talked years ago about it's down in Bournemouth. Was it Bill Brown that taught you
Yeah,
sax?
Bill was great. I mean, it's funny because we were talking a little earlier, and have done in the past, about things, there are realisations of how lucky you were maybe, or how fortunate years later.
Yeah.
So as a kid in school, I'd go into these lessons, music lessons, with this fella, Bill Brown, not knowing anything about him or the gigs he did or everything he'd done. And I have one like this incredible sort of jazz player, improviser. And he helped a lot, of course. And also Bob Hayden Gilbert as well, who was a real character, who was the head of music at Poole Grammar. Right. And he was absolutely mad on big bands, all sorts of music. But he was very supportive, very encouraging.
Yeah, and so when you were in Manchester at RNCM, who were your teachers there?
Yeah, but they had this is the mid 1980s, and what was happening literally only a couple of years before at music colleges around the UK at that point in time was you hadn't been able to study saxophone as a first study instrument up to that point. And the way that saxophone came about, or was introduced to the music colleges, was largely via clarinetists who already taught in the buildings, had a foot in the door as it were, who also doubled saxophone. And they started off like Stephen Trier at the Guildhall School of Music, and at the RNCM it was Neville Duckworth. And actually when I started there in September 1985, there were 2 saxophonists in my year, and I think it was the first time they'd had 2 saxophonists, and that was Rob Buckland and myself. Right. There were a couple of other sax players there, and there were also some clarinetists there who, Ian Dixon was there, fabulous player, incredible player, sax and clarinet. He was there as a clarinetist. And then we found out there were 2 clarinetists in our year at college, Rob and myself found out, who also play sax. And so college found out about this in the first week we're there. So the first Friday afternoon in this September 1985, they said, it's the first time we've ever had 4 sax players. You're going to be a sax quartet. So they literally booked a room for us like every Friday afternoon and said, right, here you go, play some music.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you say, because there is this thought that for a long time, saxophonists were clarinetists who owned a saxophone a lot of the time, weren't they? And I think even in the time that I've been teaching, when we've been running courses with people like yourselves and people from conservatoires, it's amazing how much the tuition and the study of saxophone has improved in the last 30 years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
taking so much more seriously.
Hugely, and that is mirrored as well with the ensembles, with the standard of solo playing, and the presence of saxophone soloists speaking more classical, and the repertoire. There's been so much commissioning. There's a absolute huge body of work now for classical saxophone. But you're right. It was. I remember. It's funny. We did an audition with the Apollo Sax Quartet in the late '80s. Mid to late 80s for a competition. I can't remember what it was, but Jack Brymer was on the panel, and I put my foot in it. The boys in the quartet were cringing because he asked some kind of question, and I said, well, it's been clarinetists who double on a bit of saxophone that have, introduced the saxophone to college, and now we want to blah-de-blah, typical like 20-year-old go for it. And the 3 boys were cringing, like heads down, And there was a pause, and he went, no, you're quite right. I was like, phew.
He was a lovely
chap.
He
was amazing, wasn't he? And what a player, what a beautiful sound.
Yeah, I remember me being 11 years old and watching him play the Mozart Clarinet Concerto in Bournemouth in the now defunct Bournemouth Winter Gardens, and going with my autograph book up to the dressing room afterwards, and he chatted to me about half an hour about the clarinet and various other things, and talking to me about the saxophone. Lovely chap, lots of time for people.
Absolutely, and in the same with Bill as well, actually. But going back to Bill Brown briefly, because Bill was when I was about 16 or something, and in school, he said, right, this Sunday evening I'm doing this gig. It was a pub in Bournemouth somewhere, or just outside Bournemouth. He said, I'm doing this gig on Sunday evening. It's with rhythm section. He said, bring your sax. I'll pick you up at so-and-so. I was like, right, okay. And I didn't have a clue what to expect, and I didn't improvise. I was playing in big bands all the time, but I wasn't improvising. So maybe I had some kind of feel or start of some kind of feel for the style of music and grooves. But I didn't have a clue what chord symbols were. Anyway, he got me up in the middle of this gig at about 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and it was just like, I remember it was like an out-of-body experience. It's like rabbit in the headlights, you don't know what on earth you're doing, and your fingers are moving and everything, but you're looking down on yourself. And anyway, they didn't boo me off the stage, but honestly, I had not a clue what I was doing. But so it was quite scary, but it was also really, really good of Bill to do that, because he didn't have to do that, with any of his students, but he did.
They were from a stable of musicians. I mean, and I knew Bill through, I think it was the Colfox Big Band course I went on, he was teaching on, and he was good friends with Alan Melly, who was my teacher, he's I think in his early 90s now, still going strong. And Bill Lim, and the trumpeter, and I think they were some of them were ex BBC Big Band, and the 2CR Big Band, which we were very lucky to have down in Bournemouth. I think Bill had the jazz program on 2CR.
Yeah, that's right.
For years and
years. I mean, going back to
great.
Colfox, that was Bridport, wasn't it? Was it Rex Trevitt?
Rex Trevitt.
Yeah, I remember when I was about 14, I went on one of those big band courses over there. It was brilliant, because it's the kind of environment that's so it's a buzz, It's great playing in the bands and the music, but it's great being around people who are into it as well, like-minded people. Yeah, it was great. People like Rex, I didn't know him that well, of course, but you look back and you think, those people like that make things happen.
Influences I've got here written in front of me as influences, as a performer, and obviously as a composer as well. That's not something I've spoken to you much about, but I mean, are there, sort of developing as a musician? Were you influenced by any particular sax players?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I think I will go back to that, but briefly, what I'm finding at the moment as a composer is it is all the different opportunities as a performer. So, in other words, playing in different styles of music and scenarios, whether it's sitting in with an orchestra like Halle or a big band, going back to school days and all that, or the Apollo Sax Quartet. So many different styles of music. I think that's, and it's been wonderful with the Apollo Quartet because we've commissioned, well over 100 pieces the last 35 years, and quite often you have the opportunity to then sit in a room with the composer and hear their thoughts about the piece and rehearse them when you've commissioned it. So yeah, all these sort of influences go into the melting pot, and I think it's only the last few years where I feel as if I've kind of understood that, and it's coming out in my writing and my playing now. But I think earlier on, of course, when you're 18, 20 years old, it was the time thinking in terms of jazz. It was a time particularly when, everyone was like looking out for the next Michael Brecker album. And, Bob Mintzer was one of my all-time favourite players. I loved the sound that Bob Berg made. I was never really particularly drawn to bebop.
Right.
I never have been really. I appreciate it enormously. And the facility that you need and everything. But I don't know, I don't know why I wasn't drawn to it. Maybe I just couldn't really see the relevance to my upbringing and my life, but it's different for everyone, each to their own, but
Sure.
I totally appreciate the language and it's so difficult, to master. So yeah, and then the classical side of the saxophone, I remember probably the second week at the RNCM as a student, 1985, Eugene Rousseau came in, the great American classical saxophonist, although he played jazz as well. And he came in and gave a masterclass, and I suppose that was probably the first time I'd heard a, as they said then, legit sound, classical saxophone sound. And it was really interesting. And obviously for a few years, all of us in the Apollo Sax Quartet, we had to start getting our heads around the concepts of sound and the different concepts of sound as a saxophonist, and using different mouthpieces and reeds, different setups to play different styles of music. But we wanted to do that and not particularly do one. And of course, in mid-20s, post-music college, that helped me, that kind of versatility, obviously be employed and have an income. So yeah, lots of different influences. I mean, the classical players, in the UK at that time, John Hall was doing some really interesting stuff and was a big mentor for the Apollo Sax Quartet. But then I like listening to all sorts of players. More recently, I did a collaborative project with Tim McAllister, the great American saxophonist, and his whole approach and sound and everything he was wonderful to work with and a really great person. And Bramford Marsalis played premiered my sax concerto in 2012 with Scottish Chamber Orchestra, and again Bramford is a very interesting musician because he's done classical saxophone albums. We know what a great improviser and jazz player is, so I feel very grateful just for having these kind of opportunities. But I also think, I know this is a slight tangent from what you've asked me, but I think there's a real importance with education, and I think that it's very, very important with courses such as JazzSmart. And what I mean is, when I'm talking to some students maybe, and we're talking, right, you've got 1 year left of music college, what are you going to do? Where are you thinking? The number of times over the last 20 odd years teaching at the RNCM and different places where they'll say, I want to do this and playing and do this and this. I'll probably pick up 2 days a week teaching, but I don't really want to. And it's like, whoa, right, just stop right there. Right, just stop. It's not about you. If you teach, it's about the other person in the room, and it's all about them. It's like, don't bring any of your insecurities to their lessons. and you've got to go in for this for the right reasons. And I learned a lot about that from Dave Hassel, the drummer I worked with a lot, because when all the session work dried up in Manchester a couple of decades ago, and he used to do all the BBC and Granada sessions, he could see the writing on the wall, and he massively got into teaching and researching, writing his own tutor books and things like that. And I just sort of stepped back and looked at Dave, and I thought, yeah, that is, this is serious. It's not just something you pick up just to kill a bit of time. You have to give it the respect. So I think there's a lot of preparation time for all of us with JazzSmart, because we all take it seriously, whether it's the organisational side, or whether it's actually choosing the pieces you're going to play. You're looking at a list of players who've signed up, how many of this instrument have you got, and it's a proper, you can't just blag it. You've got to give it some serious thought, and then think about the people coming on the courses. But yeah, sorry, that was meant to be about influences.
No, well, that smoothly brings us on to the course, which what do we have to expect on the course? Because we're in the lovely venue that we used. I think the last time we ran this was 2 years ago. I think we probably, if I think rightly, I think we managed to run the course, and then the whole country went down into lockdown, didn't it?
That's absolutely right. It was just before lockdown, mid-February, 2 weeks later into lockdown. So, so Halley St Michael's. In Ancoats, the Ancoats area of Manchester, which is a really regenerated area. A lot of sort of funding has gone into that area. So it's a lovely kind of area to be around. It's very near the northern quarter as well in Manchester, which is great. And Halley St Michael's, a wonderful space in itself to work in. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking of possibly coming along and what you'd expect, we normally have for this course in Manchester that's been running, I don't think it's run 4 or 5 times annually every February. We have about 20 players, 25 players, and I bring in ensemble music. As I said before, we look at the list. I like covering areas of technique and music in general via the pieces, maybe rather than having like a separate session about technique. I enjoy sort of each piece has a purpose and something we can latch onto, whether it's to do vibrato or phrasing or articulation, things like that. So a mixture of styles. So people who come along, obviously there's some reading involved of music, but a lot of the pieces I've got, I make sure there are some more challenging parts and some easier ones. So we don't want people feeling uncomfortable or something is way too hard. It's having the optional easier parts, or for less experienced players. So yeah, we do different sessions. We'll talk about improvising. We'll just talk about music and play a lot. And I think it's just, for me, it makes no difference whether I'm in a Apollo quartet rehearsal or with an orchestra, or playing a gig with Dave Hassel, or doing a course like this. I am interested in, at that point in time, we've got a group of people together who all have a passion for music. That is the key. It doesn't matter about age, it doesn't matter about experience levels or ability, it's the passion. And we're all there because we want to be there. So we want to make it, or I definitely want directing things, want it to sound as good as it can in a short space of time. So it's fun, but we're kind of, we're taking it seriously. We want to sort of maybe go away with, a few questions and a few things that will inspire us to listen more and practice more, myself included, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that course, as I said, is running on the 12th and 13th of February. And hopefully, obviously, for those listening to this after the event, we should be running it, fingers crossed, next year in 2023 as well. And we'll be playing some of hopefully loads of your compositions. Please tell me there's a sopranino part in it, because I will admit to the lockdown purchase of a Yanagisawa Sopranino, so I need to get my
Oh,
money's worth out of it. So
come on, there
I'll bring
definitely
that
are.
with me. Good, that's all right.
That's yours. I'll check the parts. I'll rewrite some tricky parts for you.
Good. I just got to learn to play it now.
Yeah. Just jumping in quickly,
Yeah,
James.
yeah.
Sorry. I just think again for everyone listening, I know a lot of you will have been on JazzSmart courses, but the way it's built and the different tutors you have in, and if you just look at the dates coming this year, if anyone listening, if you go to the JazzSmart website and just look at the variety of courses, and most of them are. Is it just the Manchester one that's outside the Bournemouth area?
Currently, yeah, most of what we're running is on the south coast down in Hampshire, which is usually Barton-on-Sea, but we have got the Manchester one, and I've got plans for others. I mean, there's lots of things. There's the courses that are already on the website currently, but there's more to come, and obviously we'd like to do more further north, so it makes it easier, because we do get people from the north, from Manchester and further north, and that coming down to Bournemouth, and it would make things easier for them. But yeah, if you check out www.jazzsmart.com, you can find all the information on that. The other plug I would make is actually for you and all your compositions, Andy, which maybe you want to mention something about Astute Music.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, my wife, Lauren, who's a professional harpist, she 20 years ago started a publishing company. And it's just gone from strength to strength, and so I'm in a fortunate position where I'm one of the composers who has pieces published by Astute Music, and she's managed with different composers to have pieces included on the Associated Board and Trinity Guildhall exam syllabuses. But there's a wide variety of music there and standards, sax ensemble music to solo pieces, virtuosic pieces for brass, wind, all sorts. So yeah, but that's Astute Music. Please have a look at the website again if you get another couple of minutes.
Absolutely, and some people taking ABRSM exams or teachers who are listening out there will recognise that name anyway, because there's a fair number of those books published by Astute which are on the ABRSM syllabus anyway. Well, it's been wonderful speaking to you, Andy. I'm looking forward to seeing you in what will be a week today, actually.
1 week.
1 week. And counting. So that's
fantastic.
fantastic.
As long as you don't show up in 2 weeks' time, we'll be okay.
No, that could be a problem. Anyway, it's been wonderful speaking to you, Andy. I look forward to seeing you very soon. That's been the JazzSmart podcast.